Welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining us this Thursday evening. I'm delighted that we've convened to have this conversation. I am joined by Deirdre Schifeling, the Chief Political and Advocacy Officer of the ACLU. And it's such a privilege to be joined with her. So I invite Deirdre on the stage as well, please. Deirdre, how are you this evening?
I'm good. Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. I'm so happy to be here with you all.
The pleasure is all ours. For some of our audience who are new to Ellevate Network, let me just introduce the organization and then let's get into the real meat of our discussion. So Ellevate Network has been around for 27 years. And Ellevate has invested in women and created a community to really advance ourselves and each other. And after the election, it was doubly a confirmation of how important representation is. The election showed us that there is one glass ceiling in this country, the highest office in the land, that we haven't been able to, have true representation. And I want to acknowledge some of the sentiments amongst our community. And there's a range of sentiments, but a lot of women in our community came back and there was a sense of dismay and sadness and candidly, some fear. So what we did was we decided to put out a survey. And Deirdre, we've talked about the survey results. More than 5,000 people saw the survey, and we got a lot of good feedback. And in terms of the results, the kind of topics that came up time and time again, women's access to healthcare, bodily autonomy. Folks are concerned about disinformation and how they should address that. And also other rights writ large. That's one of the topics we're going to get into here. Also, immigration reform came up repeatedly. And what we decided was we have our annual summit in June, Mobilize Women. We said we're going to do this every month. And Deirdre, you're the first of our speakers. So for everyone in the audience, we want to make this a repeated experience. And some of us said Thursday evening is hard, but Deirdre, you were so gracious in doing this. We'll make sure there are other times. But to get to kind of who got us here, I have to acknowledge Janet Hansen, the founder of Ellevate Network. She's on the call. She's a trailblazer in the truest sense. And also Gwen Young. So Gwen introduced us to you, Deirdre. So a specific debt in terms of making this happen. Gwen is the CEO of the Women's Business Collaborative. And for those of you who don't know, the WBC is an unprecedented alliance of 85 organizations, hundreds of business leaders. So I want to say thank you to everyone who made this happen. But Deirdre, let's get into it and let's talk about kind of what everyone's convened to talk about, shall we?
Let's do it.
So for anybody who's new to the ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Union has been an institution since the 1920s. Tell us about your mission and tell us about your role, Deirdre.
Yes. So first I want to apologize. I have a little bit of a sore throat. So if I start to get hoarse, I'm going to take a sip of something that I have near me. So just want to say that in advance. The American Civil Liberties Union is the nation's largest and oldest organization that defends basic rights and liberties. And that's right. We're 104 years old. We have chapters in every state in the country. We also have a national office. We have about 2,300 staff across the country. Many of them are litigators. So we do a lot of work in the courts. We also have a strong advocacy program and a strong organizing program to mobilize grassroots supporters in support of rights and liberties. And my role is the Chief Political and Advocacy Officer for the national organization. That means I focus on our national, federal legislative work. I focus on campaigns of all kinds, national and state-based campaigns to protect or expand rights and liberties. I focus on organizing and electoral work. So those are the areas those are the levers that we use to really defend rights and liberties across the country.
That's very helpful. One thing I'll say, I want to draw attention to the chat. So if anybody has any comments for Deirdre, just feel free to add that to the chat. We'll be convening questions at the end of it. So talk to us about the organization's priorities over the years of the Biden administration.
Yes. So the organization during the Biden administration was very focused on voting rights, first of all. So the John Lewis Voting Rights law that would have protected voting rights for states across the country. That was in reaction to some of the decisions that the Supreme Court made that peeled back some of the voting rights that we were used to having. We also focus on freedom to vote. So that's a law that really expands our ability to protect everybody's access to voting. We also focused on reproductive rights. So very much building a coalition around a federal law that would protect reproductive rights across the country. And immigration reform. So one of the things that we prioritized was working to build support within Congress for a balanced approach to immigration reform. And then finally, really focused on building out support for filibuster reform in the event that we have a Democratic trifecta to be able to actually move some of these priorities. So one of our challenges during the Biden administration, even though there was a Democratic trifecta, was that the filibuster in the Senate prevented much of the legislative priorities that I just ran through from moving forward because you needed 60 votes, which meant you needed Republican votes for many of those priorities, which was not possible. So filibuster reform is very important to moving an agenda forward once we have a Democratic trifecta.
So let's come to the present and the election. So that's obviously going to change kind of some of the items you mentioned, the trifecta, for example. So what is the ACLU gearing up? What is kind of the game plan for the new administration?
Yes. So we are focused on preparing for 3 different categories of threats as we see it. The first is a mass deportation effort. So President Trump campaigned on this. This was one of his very first priorities, day one priority. He is on record as saying there is no price tag. This is such a high priority to deport millions of undocumented people that there's no price tag. There's no price too high. So we know that he is going to move very quickly within his first month even to try to make this a reality. So we have been also preparing for that. We've been preparing in terms of litigation that we can bring to protect people's rights, make sure that people have due process, make sure that he does not use the military in undemocratic, unconstitutional ways to enact this priority. We've also been preparing by creating something called the Firewall for Freedom, which is a toolkit that people in states and cities can use to pass legislation in their state, in their city, to protect people's rights and liberties in their area. And so we've done a lot of work to advance protections against using state resources, National Guard, state police force, and also information that the state collects to enable the federal government to carry out an unconstitutional mass deportation. So that's one thing. The second category of threats that we're focused on is threats to reproductive rights. Reproductive rights as well as LGBTQ rights, especially transgender rights. On the reproductive rights front, there are a number of ways that the Trump administration could act to peel away reproductive rights. For instance, the Trump administration could try to enforce what's called the Comstock Act, which is a law. It's a kind of a dead letter law that's on the books from the mid 1800s. It was an anti-obscenity law that was really focused on making it illegal to mail pornography. So that was like its intent. You can't send pornography through the mail. So now the folks who are around Project 2025, which is basically Trump's legislative roadmap, are focused on how can we use this Comstock Act to have a broader category of what constitutes obscenity. Does birth control constitute obscenity? Does medication abortion constitute obscenity? And should those be illegal to send through the mail, which would really cut off access to birth control, to medication abortion, to people who live in red states where they can't really gain access, or I should say abortion ban states, because not all Republican controlled states have abortion bans, but abortion ban states where they can't get access any other way. The other way that the Trump administration could move quickly is through the Food and Drug Administration, the FDA, which has given approval for mifepristone, which is one of the most common drugs used in medication abortion, to not be used anymore, not be sort of allowed to be as broadly used as it is right now. So they could take away some of the access to medication abortion, which is, has been used for 20 years. Millions of women have taken medication abortion. It is safer than Tylenol, literally safer than Tylenol. And yet there is an effort underway to get the FDA to take away its authorization of mifepristone. So those are some of the threats that we are anticipating on that front. And then finally, we are anticipating and preparing for threats to freedom of speech, freedom to protest, freedom to dissent. You saw even just today a bill move in the House Bill 9495, which was a bill, right, to allow the Treasury Secretary unfettered ability, just sole authority himself or herself, whoever the Treasury Secretary might be, to take away the nonprofit status of any organization that it deems supporting terrorism. And supporting terrorism could mean anything. You can just decide that an organization is supporting terrorism. The ACLU would 1000% be on that list because we support freedom of speech. We support the right of student groups in high schools, in colleges, to say their opinion about the war on Gaza, for instance. So that would, put us on some kind of terrorist watch list. I mean, it sounds absurd. It sounds ridiculous, but it's really a way of silencing people. Any mainstream media organization in the country that you've heard of could probably be on the terrorist watch list, given the definition of this bill. This bill passed the House of Representatives. So it will not go forward in the Senate currently, but this is a real threat and could have a real chilling and silencing effect on speech. So those are some of the threats that we're anticipating. And I can also talk more about the ways in which we are fighting back.
Please do, because I will say, when we were looking at the survey results, when we were speaking to the women, and we'll have one of our colleagues speak about one of the community circles later on, there is a palpable sense of anxiety, Deirdre. So I'd love for you to talk about how you're fighting back. And are there any legal other safeguards that are giving us some reassurance? And perhaps this is a plea from my end, some comfort.
Yeah. Well, first, let me start with some good news, which is there were 10 reproductive rights ballot initiatives on the ballot in 10 states across this country this past electoral cycle. And 7 of them passed. 7 of them passed across red states, purple states, blue states. So these are places like Missouri. Missouri had a complete and total abortion ban with no exceptions. Now it has the right to an abortion up to viability. Arizona had a number of different abortion bans in place at different times. Now it has abortion access through viability. Nevada, Colorado, Maryland, New York, like these are all kinds of Montana. Montana now has enshrined protections for abortion access in their state constitution. So ballot initiatives, citizen-initiated ballot initiatives are one way that people are taking this into their own hands and saying, we're going to protect reproductive rights in our own state. If you're in a state that doesn't have that as an option, there are still things that you can do. You can make sure that the people who are getting elected to office, for instance, we worked in a number of state Supreme Court races, state legislative races this cycle. You can make sure that the people who are elected to your local office are people who support reproductive rights. You can work to pass pro-reproductive rights laws in your own state. part of what we are putting in our firewall for freedom is what's called a shield law. And that shield law is something that states can pass, cities can pass, and it shields people who are coming to your state or your city for reproductive services, for abortion access, from being prosecuted by other states. There's been a real trend from some abortion ban states to try to reach into places where abortion is still legal and prosecute residents from their own state who are going to those abortion access states for services. This stops that. So there's a number of things that people can do. The most important thing that we can do across the board, the only solution to this is to pass a piece of federal legislation that protects the right to an abortion for every single person in every single state. This really is a human right. It should not be dependent on your zip code. And the solution to it is to pass a piece of federal legislation. I know we are a ways away from that. Midterms are coming in 2026. And so part of what we need to do is build towards the midterms, make sure that we elect a House of Representatives that is pro-abortion access in 2026, and then go from there.
I have several threads from what you just said that I want to unpack. But before I do so, I want to let our audience know a bit more about your background, because before the ACLU, you spent a decade at Planned Parenthood Federation of America.
Yes.
So, and you were the executive director of their Action Fund. So
yes.
You can kind of talk a bit more about that, because as I mentioned on our survey, the number one concern was about women's health and bodily autonomy. So I would want to double click on that. But before I do so, there was one question that I think merits answering now, which was, you talked about HR 9495, and you said it won't pass. Could you elaborate? Because I don't want to leave that topic. And can you give us kind of the insight, pierce the veil a bit and tell us why that's the case and how that changes in Jan?
Yes. So the reason it won't pass in the U.S. Senate right now is because Majority Leader Schumer is not going to bring it up for a vote. And so it's not going to happen. However, there were a number of Democrats who did vote for it in the House. And I think that was because it had a very misleading title. Its title was I'm not going to get it exactly right, but it was basically a bill to prohibit organizations from providing material support to terrorism. This is something that is already illegal. We don't need a bill to do that. It's already against the law to provide any material support to terrorism. So basically, they created a bill, gave it a scary name, a name that made Congress people not want to vote against it, because who wants to be on the record voting against, a bill that says don't provide material support to terrorism, and tricked a lot of our Congress members into voting for something without realizing how terrible it was. So we've done a lot of education. This bill has come up over and over again. This is like the third time it's getting voted on. And each time there are fewer and fewer people supporting it. We will continue to do that education in the U.S. Senate. And I believe, it is my opinion, that it will not be brought up for a vote this session. And we will have to fight it again next year.
Thank you for clarifying, because, words matter. The framing, the title of the bill matters. And I want to use what you said, which is framing women's rights, women's healthcare as a human rights issue. And I think that is something that I would love for you to talk about. What concerns you on that front? Where is your attention focused on for the next 4 years on the women front?
Yes. Well, there are many threats to gender equality, that are posed by this incoming Trump administration. I will say the biggest threat in my mind is the threat to fundamental democracy. And that is because the only way that we can durably have rights and liberties in our country is if we have a functional democracy. If we have a democracy where if you lose an election, you get to claim it was voter fraud and not accept the results. If you have a democracy where presidents have no responsibility. They have complete immunity for their actions. If you have a democracy, if you have a government that runs at the will of one person, that is not a real democracy. And to me, the most important thing is that we preserve as much of our democracy over the next 4 years as we can. We fight for it. We fight for it with everything that we have, because without that, nothing else is possible. And so we are prepared to try to beat back attacks on freedom of speech, attacks on voting rights, attacks that happen either at the state or the federal level. Right now, we're seeing a situation in North Carolina right now, this minute, where the Republican legislature in North Carolina was unhappy that a Democrat won the governor's seat. And so they're moving to strip power away from that governor right now. This is fundamental attack on democracy, and how our government and our checks and balances need to work. And we all need to stand up, and we all need to fight back against that, because without that democracy, we are going to be lost.
You come from a unique vantage point because you have experience in organizing. What would you want to, tell us in terms of grassroots efforts before the midterm? What do we need to do? And I'm going to ask another version of this question in terms of resources again. So we'll come back to this again. But tell us about the organizing efforts. What can we leverage from your experience?
Yes. So first, I'll just say all those ballot initiative wins that I talked about, where people had citizen initiated ballot measures that restored rights in their states, that was all done by grassroots volunteers. That was thousands and thousands and thousands of people in those states collecting signatures, knocking on doors, making phone calls, making sure that everybody understood what the ballot measure would do, making sure that their friends and neighbors got out to vote for the ballot measure. So that is a huge grassroots success. And it restored rights and protected rights for 32 million people. It was not a small accomplishment. That kind of grassroots power and outreach is essential. It's essential in elections. People trust their neighbors. They trust people they have a relationship with. It's essential in moving state legislation. So when something's happening in your state, good or bad, getting involved and getting your friends and neighbors involved, making sure that your legislators hear from you. There is nothing more powerful than an organized group of people. The ACLU has 6.5 million grassroots members. We call them people power members. If you want to join us, go to aclu.org and sign up to be a people power volunteer. We will train you. We will put you to work. We have affiliates in every single state. So that is one avenue for action. But yes, I'm a deep believer in the power of organizing. I've seen it myself. I've seen organizing win rights, win laws, win protections for people, and we need more of it.
You're in this fight day to day, and maybe the fact that you're in this fight day to day is the comfort I was looking for in this call. But you're seeing things that are perhaps less obvious to some of us. So on the subject of women's rights, what are the risks you're seeing that may not be obvious, but also where are you getting your information from? So how can we also be well informed? We talked about disinformation. So talk to us about, through that lens, where you're seeing the day to day, you're seeing things that perhaps others are not.
Yes. I mean, I think anything that I know, it's because I'm getting it from a public news source. So whatever I know, you can also know. By reading the newspaper, reading credible news sources, listening to what President Trump and the people around him say they're going to do. They lay it out very clearly. They're not shy. Today, there was a raft of news articles from the anti-abortion movement laying out their entire playbook, exactly how they're going to attack reproductive rights, very clearly. So I think part of it is just reading your national newspaper and understand, getting your information from there. A couple of areas of threat that may not be as obvious that we are preparing for are attacks to Title 10. So that's the family planning, federal family planning funding. So it gives family planning, it gives birth control to low-income people. That's an area where we expect the Trump administration to zero that out after a huge many-year success story of reducing teen pregnancy. So this is like on the heels of a huge success in reducing teen pregnancy. They're going to zero out this family planning and birth control program that's been so essential to it. Another area is Title IX. So the law that prohibits discrimination on basis of sex in sports, in schools, in education. This is an area that they have targeted and I think will continue to target to chip away at, that we will have our eyes on. The final thing I'll just mention is a disturbingly high number of advisors around President Trump have made various comments over the months about taking away women's right to vote. And they've done it in sort of like an offhanded or joking way. Some of them have not been joking. Some of them have been very serious. Some of the more evangelical religious leaders have been very serious. But I would keep a sharp eye on that. I don't think that's a joke. I think that's like a test balloon. And it sounds absurd, right? How could we take away women's right to vote? We haven't had it that long. And I think that's something that I take very seriously when they're making jokes about it, and I think we all should.
My sense of concern just skyrocketed when you said
Sorry.
that. So I think that's what we're here for, right? I'm going to start pulling questions from the audience, so we're seeing them in the chat, and the team is convening them. So I'm going to put some questions out because I think there's something to be said for the quote that people keep hearing about. They're fighting or they're attacking the enemy from within. In a way, that's us. You just alluded to women's right to vote. How can we be safe while we fight back? Any precautions we should take?
Yeah, I think how can we be safe? I'm not sure that there is a good answer to that. I'm not sure that there is any reassuring thing I can say about our ability to be absolutely safe in this moment. I think it's always smart to assess your situation. And if you're going to a protest and it seems like there's a counter protest right there, you want to take that into consideration. If you're organizing a protest, you want to make sure there's good security. I think it's not a bad idea to go to organize on encrypted in an encrypted way, like Signal. That's a free way to just have your text messages be encrypted. I think that taking those kind of basic precautions is a good idea. There's also a number of organizations that have sprung up to help people when they're being attacked personally. So when people are being doxxed, when people are being targeted for online harassment or in real life harassment because of their political activities, there are more and more organizations popping up that will help do a security screen. There's an app called, a service called Delete Me, which can basically erase a person from being easily found on websites, personal information about that person, so it makes it harder to find like your home address, stuff like that. So there are ways to do that. The one thing I would just like to end with is on this question is, this is their strategy, is to make us feel afraid of each other. This divide and conquer strategy is, an age-old successful way to hold authoritarian power. And we have to resist it. We have to resist it. We can't live in fear, and we have to stand up. And that might take bravery and courage and different people doing it in different ways at different times. But if we give in to the fear, we are letting them win.
Very powerful way to kind of motivate us, Deirdre. And I think I'm looking at the comments. People are providing resources. Any specific resources you would encourage us to look at to get, under the hood on bills that will affect our rights? Anything you use as a reference?
Yes. So the ACLU has 2 documents that you can find on our website that I think would be helpful. The first is we wrote a series of Trump memos. It's like literally called the Trump memos, where we took what Trump and the people around Trump said he was going to do through Project 2025, and we analyzed it. We broke it down. We said exactly what these things would do, and also how we plan to fight them. The kind of litigation we could bring, the kind of advocacy that we can do. So that is a good snapshot, and it's by topic. So, LGBTQ attacks, reproductive rights attacks, voting rights attacks, immigration attacks, DEI attacks. So that's one resource I would direct you to. The other one is there is also a link, and there's a blog post on the ACLU website around Firewall for Freedom. So the Firewall for Freedom, which is a state and local resource, as both state and local components, is the kind of pieces of legislation, executive orders, directives that elected officials can do to protect the rights and liberties of people in their state or in their town or city. So I would definitely direct you to that.
You mentioned 2 things, and we certainly should convene to talk more on them, but I don't want to miss out. You talked about LGBTQ rights, but you also talked about diversity. What kind of the future on both fronts? What does the frontier look like? I know, and we might be short on time, but please give us a preview.
Okay. The frontier in terms of the ways in which the Trump administration could act to attack those rights, I think looks like banning coverage of gender affirming care, through the ACA, through Medicaid, anything that it could even be through hospitals that receive federal funding. Think about any way that federal money can be used to advance an ideological agenda. They will figure it out. So money, attaching a bunch of rules around what kind of healthcare can be provided, just like they already do through the Hyde Amendment with abortion. Abortion cannot be covered with federal money because of this Hyde Amendment. I would expect them to take that and expand it to gender affirming care. In terms of DEI, same playbook. Colleges, universities, any place that receives federal money, or any place that is tax exempt, which are many universities are tax exempt. Now you can put strings on it. Now you can say, we don't like your approach to DEI. You have to change it. We don't like your approach to the curriculum. You're going to have to change it. Trump was on record. Actually, Elon Musk recently posted on X a video of Trump from about a year ago, giving a whole speech about how he planned to make colleges and universities get rid of their so-called woke agenda, by which he meant DEI, by which he meant like any classes that, acknowledge the history of slavery, you name it, it's probably in his, woke agenda litmus test, that, they would have to change their curriculums or they would be fined in the amount of their endowments. So this is like really weaponizing federal power, right? You're going to fine colleges and universities. You're going to trample on freedom of speech, freedom to teach, freedom of expression, and fine them in the amount of their endowments. So this is the kind of bullying, authoritarian behavior that I think we can anticipate, and we will, of course, fight that in the courts.
It's interesting, Deirdre. If someone this morning had told me that women's right to vote was at risk, I would have dismissed it as some sort of dystopian fiction. But hearing you talk about this is a wake-up call for me personally. But then let's talk about other risks that perhaps have been unimaginable to some of us. The weaponizing of the government, federal workers are being fired, the military. Like, what are your thoughts on that? Are we really preparing for things that have been beyond the pale? How are you thinking about that?
Yeah, I mean, we are preparing for that. And I think Whether or not he can go all the way through with it, I think is a matter of both the courts. I think it's a matter of people of principle standing up and saying no, people in the military saying no, people in the Senate saying no, and all of us, citizens saying no. So I think that's right. Many of the ways that he has offered that he wants to use the Insurrection Act, for instance, against people who disagree with him, against peaceful protesters. He has a history of doing this. He did this during a Black Lives Matter protest at Lafayette Square in Washington, D.C. during his first term. He, turned the federal military on peaceful protesters, peaceful Black Lives Matter protesters in Lafayette Square. So he has a history of doing this. He will definitely push the envelope on this. And I think it's going to be really up to all of us to really stand up to him and say, this is a democracy. This democracy has rules, and those rules matter and have to be enforced. But we'll see. It's going to take all of us.
When we convened this series, Deirdre, it was supposed to be, finding a way to respond to the feedback we were getting from the community. We have framed this as a call to action. How can we mobilize? And right now in the chat, there's a high schooler who says, I'm in high school and many girls my age want to make a difference. How can we mobilize? There are college-age women that have the same question. Please talk to us about kind of the broad Ellevate community mobilizing, but also please speak to cohorts of young women and girls.
Yes.
How can we mobilize?
We need you. We need you. Well, first, if you're in Washington, D.C. or near Washington, D.C., there will be a big rally in front of the Supreme Court coming up on December 4th during a transgender rights case. The case is called Skirmetti. And that's happening from 10 to 12 in front of the Supreme Court in DC. So that's like one thing that you can do if you're in the area, is come show support for the right to bodily autonomy, the right for people to have the healthcare they need. And so that's one thing, very immediate. Also, two other ideas for you. First, please sign up to the ACLU People Power volunteer cohort. We will put you to work in your state. Sign up, become part of it. We'll give you some training. We'll give you some orientation to what's happening in your state, and we'll put you to work. So sign up at peoplepoweraclu.org. And then finally, for high school students and for college students, the ACLU runs something that's called the Advocacy Institute. It is a week-long training program. It's during the summer. It's in person. It is free. And high school students and college students can be part of it. And it basically trains you in how to be a strong advocate, either in high school or in college. And it's an incredible experience. So I would strongly urge any of you to, if you're on this call, you're probably a good candidate for the Advocacy Institute, which will happen over the summer.
And we'll follow up with links as well. So we'll make sure we circulate that as well. Deirdre, I cannot thank you enough. You've been so generous with your time, convening with such short notice. This was, in a sense, an emergency meeting we convened, and just sharing the depth of your knowledge, preparing us for what lies ahead. I feel energized. So my final question is, how do you stay energized?
I am an optimist at heart. I'm an optimist, and I believe that we will succeed in protecting rights and liberties and in protecting democracy in the long haul. I also have 3 children, 2 of whom are teenage girls, and we have to succeed. I just feel like there's no choice but to succeed. And so I feel grateful every day that I get to work for the ACLU, that I get to work with amazing people like you. Thank you so much for having me on this call. And I'm so excited to work with all of you to make our country what it should be.
Such a pleasure. The pleasure was entirely ours. Thank you so much, Deirdre.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, everybody, for your questions. I think that was certainly enriching as a conversation. Ellevate is here for you. please take action. We want to make progress. And now more than ever, we want to band together. And I think that's really our goal, this community, our chapter network. And on that note, I want to invite Myra Goodine to join as well. As most of you or some of you may know her, Myra is our chapter program manager. She wears many hats. She also is one of the leaders of our Black Women's Community Circle. So Myra, I'm just so delighted to have you here, and you can speak to some of the ways in which Ellevate can provide spaces. Please take it away, Myra.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. It's really good to be here. And I'm really excited to talk about our community circles. These are really, just to paint the picture, these are designated to be safe and supportive spaces where women from either specific identities, shared experiences can come together, importantly, connect and have meaningful conversations about the things that are timely and matter most. So one thing that I'm thrilled to say is that in my circle and others, we've been hearing that it offers members a sense of belonging and understanding. And that's so vital for both personal and collective growth. And speaking of growth, we are now 9 circles in total. And we really believe at Ellevate that's reflecting our commitment to fostering community and making sure voices can be amplified in meaningful ways in safe spaces. And as Anusha mentioned, I am proud to lead our Black Women's Circle. And I couldn't say this without recognizing my amazing co-hosts, both Nikki Winston and Fabienne Michael. It's really been a space that's just taken off for women to share like their experiences. And we've also seen just like the solidarity that happens there. And it's truly a supportive network. We internally like to always say it's our monthly exhale, and we consistently leave the space more energized than where we came. And so if you haven't attended one of our circles before, fun fact, we like to take a page out from Vegas to where what happens in the circles stays in the circles. And so to honor that, I want to maintain the trust and integrity. So I do want to share, though, at a high level, a recent moment that actually ties really closely to why we're all here today. Just this past Friday, we held an additional meeting that was outside of our regular programming, and our goal was to have a candid discussion about the recent election. We recognized that there was a profound impact it had, and particularly within the Black women's community, we saw that there was a need for this space. And it was an opportunity for all of us to come together and really just process what's going on and support each other. And I really found that was such a powerful conversation, and it really reinforced why these circles are really essential. And so I want to leave you with this before I go. It's really more than just a space for conversations, truly. They're a force for when we're just trying to nurture relationships. I've seen inspiration for change, and it demonstrates the strength of women coming together. And what's really lovely about that is there's this ripple effect of progress, whether it's in personal or professional growth. So really just overall a testament to transformative power of community and action. So I encourage each of you here to join a circle and see this power for yourself. And I personally would like to invite each and every single one of you here to an upcoming special that we're cooking up for Black History Month. We really find that there's this duality in the conversation that's applicable for everyone. So we want to make sure that anyone can attend. I'll drop that in the chat, but thank you for giving me a moment to speak about community circles. Hope to see you all there. And Anusha, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you, Myra. So a big thank you to Deirdre and Myra for speaking. But I also want to say thank you to my partner, Ali McDonald. Ali's the one who hit the gong and said, women need this. We need to start convening the series. So we have an exciting series of topics coming up every month. We'll be unveiling the topics, and we barely scratched the surface on all the topics that Deirdre mentioned. So we want to keep the momentum. Please reach out to Ali. We're going to put Ali's email in there. And she is the one this is her brainchild. She's thinking about topics, and we want to hear from you. The survey was one step, but we want to build up this community to be a place where you can have these conversations. So I cannot thank anybody more than our audience members for showing up this Thursday evening to have this conversation. Thank you, everybody, and have a good evening.